Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar on donor engagement. My name is Kiara Benez. I'm the nonprofit specialist at the Catalog for Philanthropy. I'm going to give folks just one more minute before we get started. All right, for those of you just now joining, welcome. Again, my name is Kiara Benez, and I'm the nonprofit specialist at the Catalog. I'm excited to have you here today to talk about engaging younger donors, and specifically Millennials and Gen Z, as these donor groups have some similarities to each other that might differ from other age demographics that we're currently engaging. So that's who we are going to be focusing on today. So first off, I want to start off with some background info on this group. So as you work to engage Millennials and Gen Zers, you're going to want to keep in mind for context that this is a starting point, and you're really working to set your future self, your future organization up for success. These donors, Millennial and Gen Z, people who fall in that age range, aren't necessarily going to be your major donors, at least not yet, but they can give some significant gifts that really have the potential to grow over time. So since you're likely engaging these donors really as an entry point to giving, it's important to offer ways to get started. And the easier and more streamlined you make it, the better. So, how much information, thinking about how much information do you really need to collect, and how can you communicate this to the group and make it easy for them to get started donating. And really building off of this being an entry point, you're going to want to consider some new approaches. So traditional approaches may not work with this under 40 group, and as they age, they'll still need new practices. So just because, as they get into their 40s doesn't mean that you will continue to treat them as you currently treat your over 50 donors. They're still going to be a group that is engaged, and we'll talk about the different themes that you can work to engage them on, but there'll be a group that is engaged in those themes kind of throughout the duration of their giving. So some of these approaches, again, would be to talk into moving about supporting in terms of justice and equity instead of helping, and really focusing on the relationships that you're building with these donors. And this is really a great time to engage these donors, since the pandemic really highlighted ways that their communities could be supported, and they're looking to stay engaged with the community as we kind of move into post-pandemic times. People are still wanting to be engaged in their community, especially through donations. That's one avenue to do it. So this is a really great time to focus on this age group. I will also say all of the tips that I'm going to be sharing today really can apply to the majority of donors. But we have found that these work best with Millennial and Gen Z groups as they're coming into kind of the philanthropic world. But that being said, if you do all of these tips, it's not going to necessarily keep other donors from donating to you. These are just additional tips to focus on as you really do focus on this age group and really bringing them into the fold. All right, so tip number one is to consider themes. So there are three main thematic areas that you can focus on. That's community, justice, and action. So this group really values community and a sense of connection, as well as community-led solutions. So you'll want to focus on how you partner within the community. So you may consider using language around clients and give a face to the people you work with. Another thing to highlight is collective giving power. Is there a way that your organization can create a giving circle where a group who supports your work comes together to donate a larger sum as a group. Does one exist already? You'll want to think about this as you think about how can you turn donating and kind of supporting your organization into a community that supports your organization, as well as highlighting the community that your organization works with. This age group also and this demographic also value justice. So especially thinking about systems and social justice are a priority. So to this extent, you'll want to understand, and they'll want to understand how your organization's work fits into the whole picture. So if you haven't already considered this, we would advise thinking about how to discuss the equity impacts of your work. And so when you're highlighting daily work, you should be thinking about highlighting how does this work tie into the larger system and how can we communicate this with our donors. And then finally, Millennials and Gen Zers are looking for action-oriented and action-oriented results. So you're going to think through ways to show change and results as a result from your organization's actions and showcasing longer term work through projects and initiatives that are either in action or soon to wrap up. So for this, client stories are going to be the most helpful, but as much as you can, you're going to want to explain the context behind them and share your plans or goals for the future. This is really going to highlight to this group what they can look forward to as their donations may continue to grow and as they continue to support your organization. Next, so tip number 2 here is to get their time. So you know what you're focusing on, you're thinking about community, justice, and action. Now, how do we get their time? And really consider volunteering opportunities as an entry point and intro to your organization. So a lot of times volunteering can help to get to the 3 themes we just discussed. Volunteering opportunities give people a chance to see and build community, volunteering is action-oriented, and people can be directly involved in the big picture. So in terms of volunteering, you want to be sure, especially as you consider volunteering as a pipeline to becoming donors, that you're creating opportunities at different times. So during and outside the workday, weekends, things like that. So, going back to that clarity of how to get started donating, you'll want to make it clear what the opportunity is and how to sign up. So thinking truly even just through the logistics of what does this look like on the other end for your donor? What does this look like for Millennials and Gen Zers who are very familiar with online platforms, signing up through online things, filling out forms online? How can you make your sign up process as clear as it can be? And Millennials in particular are especially more drawn towards taking on smaller projects. So that could be distributing flyers, hosting a fundraising event, sending emails, encouraging others to donate, which we'll get into a little bit later. But they're more interested on these smaller projects than necessarily serving on long-term volunteer committees or boards like their predecessors were. Now, especially as we're just now coming back to in person with our programming, or at least dabbling in it, if you'd created virtual opportunities, you can keep those. So while we see people wanting to go back to volunteering in person, some people are still open to doing this work remotely and may prefer to do so. So as you consider the types of volunteer work you offer, if you currently only have some kind of standard volunteer options, you may want to consider any needs of your organization that require specific skills and offer these opportunities to the community. Is there pro bono work that you would really benefit from? Do you need help with bookkeeping? Are there admin tasks? What are these more specialized opportunities for people to get involved? And this really goes back a little bit to wanting to feel a sense of connection. If I have a skill you need, I'll feel more useful and connected to your organization if I'm providing that skill. And then finally, with community, you want to highlight the opportunity to work with other volunteers, include volunteer testimonials as part of your recruitment, And then discuss possible interaction with clients, staff, or volunteers, really getting again to one, the building of community and feeling like that is what this age group really wants to focus on, but also how much can they engage in direct service? What does that look like? So kind of giving them a sense of behind the curtain, behind the door, what does your organization do and how can they be involved? So continuing on that theme of community, tip number 3 is to build connections. So, just as volunteering can be a social activity, so can giving. I mentioned this a bit earlier, but in terms of thinking about building connections in terms of groups, you can create your own giving circle or group. If you're not familiar with a giving circle, what this is a group of people who support your organization. Usually this is a younger group, and they all give a regular amount that is small in size, and they all kind of put it in the pot, and then monthly or yearly, annually, quarterly, whatever the group decides, they're giving the larger sum of all their individual giving. So they're collectively a major donor, but individually they're giving a little bit less to that larger group, and then kind of the group will decide where to donate to. And oftentimes organizations that have a giving circle, it's focused specifically on their organization. So all the donations that come in from the individuals in the group each month will go to that larger sum that is donated. So you can think about creating an organizational giving group or giving circle, but also to offer incentives for giving. So, if someone gives at a certain level, will they be part of a specific group that maybe thinks differently? Are they invited to a specific cultivation event? Things like that. That being said, you definitely want to balance that. You want to make sure that you aren't creating a program that you then have to spend a lot of time sustaining and focusing on that versus the daily work that you are doing. But that's an option. But we mainly see kind of more cultivation or the group mentality around monthly donors. So once they become a monthly donor, they're part of a specific email list. They're thanked a specific way. The tip here really also is to keep groups relatively small. Otherwise, you're losing the sense of the group. And oftentimes, especially if you're trying to create that group, that's the buy-in for whoever's doing it. They get to be a part of this group. So you want to make sure you're keeping it relatively small. Events are also a great way to build community. These can be small stewardship or cultivation events. So as much as possible, tying events into an experience. So, what atmosphere are you creating? Is there an activity? What's the draw? So as you market for the event, highlight attributes of the group that will be there. Is it a group of people who are passionate about mentorship for youth? Is it a group of people who are supporting community arts organizations? Are they environmental change makers? Thinking about that group. And then this tip makes it a bit easier on you, but leave the majority of the time for networking or socializing so people have a chance to form relationships. Now you're gonna want to do some sort of introduction, provide some content, maybe an activity, but really you can focus these events as more appreciation and stewardship focused. Oftentimes events are a great way for people to build that community, start to think about that giving circle. Events are also a great place to start building the community that will hopefully, as this age group ages, they'll feel the sense of community. They've met everyone, they've continued to be involved since they were younger. And it's almost that group mentality. Hey, I met so-and-so at this event. If they're still giving, I'm still giving, and they will stay with your organization. And then finally, in terms of language, it's not just what we do, but how we talk about it, which I'm sure we all know. So it's important, just again, we're really focusing on community, and I continue to talk about that, but it's important to use community-centric language and really talk about the collective giving and power that this group has to make change in the community, to really be a supporter of your organization. I'm going to pause there before we get into tip 4 and 5 to see if there are any questions. So if you have a question, feel free to go ahead and pop it into either the chat or the question module. Otherwise, I'll make sure that I get to some questions at the end as well. All right, I don't see any coming through right now. Feel free to put those in whenever, and I'll make sure that we get to those. So tip number 4 is to share content that connects. So let's talk about some social media in your digital efforts. So what will resonate with this audience? So specifically with this audience, you're going to want to focus on visuals, stories, and data. So for visuals, one thing that we're seeing resonate really well with millennials and Gen Z is candid photography. So thinking about your social media, you don't need, and thinking about visuals, these don't need to be posed and professional all the time. You can focus on that candid photography or simple graphics. Your goal is really to stand out in their feeds, things that they're checking normally. Candid photos are great because they can really showcase the work and the real work that goes on at your organization, and people can see you in action. Now, this isn't saying necessarily to post blurry photos that you can't see what's going on, but rather to focus on highlighting things that may not be that perfect smiled posed picture where everything's in focus. You can certainly post your professional photos, but feel free to also post what actions are happening, engaging with people, which I'll talk about in a minute, on different platform stories. Just being a little bit, you can be more real with this group, and they're more open to seeing all of that, and it really resonates with them. In terms of storytelling, sharing stories is a powerful connector, as I'm sure we all know. But broadly speaking, powerful narrative pitches will broadly work best. So consider sharing these stories in a newsletter or highlighting on digital platforms. And this really helps potential donors imagine the impact they can have. And then finally, share data. These groups are interested in data and also how it was gathered. So as you share important metrics, mention who you surveyed, what went into this data. Going back to the graphics, you can share data via simple graphics and share where it came from in a caption or elsewhere. If the data is simple to understand, these groups are more likely to share it with their networks on social media, who then will be impacted, and really it'll resonate with them. So these two age groups use their phones for one of the main ways that they engage with news and organizations. So you want to leverage that as you create posts. You know, what's shareable? Are there ways you can create interaction on socials with polls or quizzes that bring them into the fold of your organization? And oftentimes, if people are engaging day to day, week to week with your social media, you know, you're posing a question, you're doing trivia on your organization, the more you do that, then when it comes time for a call to action, they're already kind of in the fold and they feel more accountable to then feel like that call to action is specific to them, that they then want to come into your organization via donation of time, volunteering, all of that. And in terms of what not to do, as I mentioned, posts and pictures don't need to be overly perfect, but you still want to keep your brand voice and make sure you're checking for typos, of course. We're not saying just post anything and everything, but no need to portray perfection and idealism, but rather showcase the real work that happens. And of course, again, this shouldn't deter you from sharing great professional picture, but don't so shy away from the less professional too. In addition here, in terms of solicitation, you'll want to be careful that you don't focus all of your digital efforts on solicitation. The focus, again, should be on highlighting your work, impact, data, the community. You can certainly, you know, make the ask, and you probably will, and create calls to action digitally, but you'll want to focus on these other components really as primers for the solicitation piece. Just because this group is online a lot doesn't mean that you should use your social media only for solicitation. Really thinking again about the different themes that you're focusing on when you're thinking about justice, when you're thinking about action and community. Use that, highlight that in your social media, and then when you make that call to action, this group will be receptive to it there. Okay, so we're on our last tip, which is focused campaigns, really targeting attention for specific times or causes. So really breaking out and trying to think about how can you engage this group through campaigns, and using campaigns as like those windows of time where you can really target these donors. So campaigns are really just a great way to solicit donations in a way that doesn't make it the focus of all your social media all the time. campaigns really help to target attention for specific times or causes, and really can get to that community building, action-oriented motivations that these donors have. So there's a couple campaign types to highlight here, which you can see on screen. So first we have Giving Tuesday. This campaign happens, as we know, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, and it grows annually. So more and more people are aware of it, and more young people are engaged in it each year. And this will continue to be a major driver of giving, especially by younger audiences, and especially as their peers are doing it and sharing that. So you want to focus on Giving Tuesday as a time to kind of focus on your Millennial and Gen Z donors. Another type of campaign here is recurring. So, campaigns around frequent and small gifts tied to a group mindset can be really effective. This is when we consider giving circles recurring, also a bit of collective, but giving circles are recurring campaigns, things where you're doing a monthly campaign to this group. This group is giving a smaller amount. You're thinking about how you continue to keep this person donating to your organization year round. How does each month, where does the donation go? Peer-to-peer, this is a campaign that works best with younger donors, and it's focused on sharing influence and leveraging relationships. If you haven't done a peer-to-peer, this is really where one person will try to raise a specific amount and encourage others in their network to contribute and also create giving pages. This really works well, especially in the social media age, especially with younger donors, when they can share their own story, if you can get your current volunteers and donors to share their stories that will resonate with this audience. Peer-to-peer is a great campaign to use with this group. Also with specific, focus clearly on what you will do if you hit your goals, and what will it allow in the community. If you raise $1,000, what specifically does it go to? If you raise $5,000, what does it go to? Set somewhat tangible goals that people can see that this is exactly where their money is going. This is where a $50 donation goes. This is where a $10 donation goes. As part of the catalog, if you're part of our Giving Tuesday campaign, we always have our organizations list out with different monetary donations go to specifically. And this is something we really encourage, especially with this group, so that they feel like they're kind of giving that specific service or item or whatever it is to the organization. Again, another type of campaign here is collective. So it highlights how this is a communal effort that requires broad participation. Again, this could be something like, okay, we are asking for $20 from 100 people in our network. Looking at it as like, how do we create that collective giving power and that sense of community? Is this an event that you're hosting, a campaign? Well, this is a campaign, but how are you really focusing on the collective power? And then finally, thinking about campaigns urgency-wise, give a narrow time window to drive action quickly. So maybe this campaign is a week long, maybe it's a few days long, but you're really trying to drive immediate action. Again, this is a great time to share on social media. It doesn't feel to others like they're constantly sharing on social media. It's only during this short period of time that they would be sharing and giving really to meet your goal. Okay, so those were the 5 tips we have. Not sure where to start. I want to give you 6 action items that you can work on following this webinar. So 1, research. Let this webinar be your first action, but also see what other organizations, especially ones similar to yours, are doing to connect with Millennial and Gen Z donors. See what's working for other organizations. Plan. So plan at least 1 to 2 efforts during your year targeted at younger donors. Again, this doesn't have to be your full amount of efforts, but it can be something that you focus on specifically, especially as we're in it for the long haul, and really getting these donors brought into the organization as an entry point. 3, ask. You have to make that ask. So even small gifts can add up and begin that relationship. So think about what your ask for the year will be, especially for this kind of newer age group that's in the giving world. Number 4, another tip here is to create. So you may need new communications or materials that are still on brand, but again, think about that socials more candid pictures that you can create, maybe a brochure around the equity impacts, a flyer explaining the long-term benefits of our community that they're creating and becoming a part of as being a donor. Really think about what you might need to create. Again, with goals, you're going to want to set a goal and make this intentional, and then come back to this webinar to set additional actions. And then finally, data. So in your current donor base, where did your younger donors come from? If a majority came from a certain avenue, focus on that. That might be what's best for your organization and the way that people have found your organization. All right, so that's what we have for you today. I want to pause here to see what questions are coming up before we end today's webinar. Okay, I see a question here, how important is this age group? How much time should I be focusing on this age group? That's a great question. Generally, it's good to diversify our donor bases and make our appeals interesting to multiple different demographics, age groups, whatever that is for your organization. So in that way, we would say that it's important to start thinking about this Millennial and Gen Z group as one way to diversify, one way to create a different appeal, but also as we think about the long term for our organizations. How can you set yourselves up for success? What can you do right now just to get people started thinking about your organization? Maybe it's just that original way of what is one way to donate, what is one way that they can volunteer and come into the fold. I would say just generally, again, millennials aren't going to be those major donors, not necessarily, at least not yet, just because naturally as you get older, you tend to give more because of larger amounts of wealth. And Millennial and Gen Z, given the amount of time they've been in the workforce, they may not be those major donors. But again, thinking about realistically, what does this look like for your organization, and how can you get people into those recurring donations? How can you get them into that collective giving circles there? So really just thinking about setting your expectations realistically. Yeah, I see a question here. Do you have any resources to suggest regarding a giving circle? Oftentimes, and I can reach out and work with Laura to see if we can get you all some resources. But generally what we suggest is talking to some of if you have some younger donors or donors who are really engaged, talking with them to see if they have a group of friends who wants to start a giving circle, and explain what that can mean. They're giving this amount. Do they think that they could get a certain amount of friends, maybe to give a little bit lesser, to then create that larger give each year? So what we really recommend is maybe you have someone who runs really strong or brings in a lot during peer-to-peer campaigns. And so we really recommend starting with them, so it feels more of like a community and donors within other donors and bringing in other donors effort, rather than you going out and seeking everyone to put them in a group. So that's where we recommend first looking, the people who bring in a lot during peer-to-peer, and then any younger donors who seem really engaged in your work, see if it's something they're interested in. Oftentimes it can also be a leadership opportunity for them. Some bigger giving circles have committees that talk about where the money, there's a whole host of resources which I can talk to Laura and see if we can share some with you all. But that's where we would recommend starting. Oh, yes, this is really great. Thank you for sharing this. Someone wants to mention context of Millennial and Gen Z in terms of age range. The oldest millennials who are in that group, they turn 40 this year, and Gen Z is already in the workforce. So these, we're not necessarily talking about teens and college students. We're talking about people who are like 20 to 40, most often like 22 to 40 this year. So these are the next group of donors that they have been in the workforce for a bit of time, and really you're setting them up for getting involved kind of long term. Often a lot of them are already giving in some way, shape, or form, but the goal really is to continue and work in getting them further engaged for the longevity of their kind of giving career. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Those are the questions I had. If anything comes up, feel free to reach out to Laura or myself. We're happy to get you more information. But thanks so much for joining today's webinar, and really appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone.